This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine. This little light of mine, I'm gonna let it shine, let it shine, let it shine, let it shine. Welcome, Talk Catholic, the website.com, your host, Tim Kilcoyne. No agendas here, just the straight and narrow, through Mary to Jesus, the Catholic faith proclaimed and preserved. Hope to see you here every week. Talk Catholic with Tim Kilcoyne, and it's time to talk man to man. Well, that's the actual title of the book today by Father James Farfaglia. A real priest speaks to real men about marriage, sexuality, and family life. We'll get to that after our little musical interlude. I'd like to follow up with some commentary on last week's session from the book Man Your Post, where Andrew Laubacher gave us his journey through pornography to full conversion to the Catholic faith. And then I'd like to draw to your attention an internet video by Father Isaac Relia, a Franciscan priest, and it's entitled, A Priest Reveals the Secret to Defeating Satan's Greatest Weapon. And this was on LifeSite News just recently, so you'll be able to bring it up with that title. And it ties very nicely into Andrew Laubacher's story, in addition to some casual reading that I was doing this week from a book that might well have been at the heart of St. John Paul II's theology of the body. The book is called Sex and the Marriage Covenant, A Basis for Morality by John F. Kipling. And there's just one particular excerpt here that I'd like to read that I think really highlights why the church teaches what she does relative to human sexuality. But first, my opening story. What happened to Tim this week? I don't lead that exciting a life, believe me, but I do like sharing little concrete episodes of how you can kind of share your faith in a discreet way. Here's a beauty. I was in an antique gift shop this week, and I just stumbled upon an old little, looked like a miniature suitcase, and it had a clarinet inside. And the price ticket on the suitcase was $10. I said, this is not possible. This was an actual clarinet, no doubt an old one, but still. And the suitcase was an antique, but in extremely good condition. So I brought it up to the front desk, and I just told them, I said, could this be mispriced? And she said, I'm sure it was. Let me call the owner. And she couldn't get the owner immediately, but then she called me back later. So in other words, I was not able to buy it at the $10. And again, I was the one that voluntarily brought it to their attention. And she calls me up and said that the owner was going to put it out on eBay. I said, wait a second. I think I'm the first customer to see this to try to, to buy it. So I got on that phone right away and just told them, that's not appropriate. I am the customer that pointed this out, brought it to your attention. It was a mistake, and I would at least expect the dignity of being the first customer to have at least the first opportunity to buy it. And would you, by all means, move that up the ladder to the owner? And lo and behold, I got a phone call the next day, and I was told that the price would be $40. So I told them, I'll take it. I'll be over tomorrow. So anyway, at the recording of the show, I went over today, and I walked in and I said, it's not because I'm a clarinet player, because I'm not. And it's not because I need this, because I don't. It's because of the moral principle of the matter. And I said it with a chuckle, of course. I said, you can thank me later. Now, this is a good example, I think, ladies and gentlemen, of how we can kind of make our points morally without being overwhelming. And she had a little light smile on her face. She didn't come to affirm my position. I did get that sense that she just wanted to remain kind of silent. But again, she's just a worker there, not the owner. But it was a very lighthearted way of trying to get the principle of truth the truth of things communicated in everyday mundane transactions that we engage in every day. These kind of things are going on, and you have an opportunity to stand your ground in principle and be Catholic, be at least Christian, be at least of right reason and the moral law. Not even people that are not of faith can exercise some right-mindedness with regard to fairness and justice. So that's it. But it's just another example of manners being violated. That was outrageous that she was just going to put it out there on eBay and see how much. She obviously discovered that this thing is worth quite a bit of money, and she could probably get 3 times the price that she ended up selling it to me for. Okay, so justice can happen in this life. Don't ever forget it. Well, okay, in reflecting upon last week's Man Your Post, Chapter 2, St. Joseph Most Chaste, we were hearing the story of Andrew Laubacher talk about, again, his journey through the lurid world, sordid at that, of pornography and pornographic wandering on the internet, etc. And it calls to mind that this is just one violation of the proper context for even thinking about human sexuality in the Catholic tradition. I'd like to read from this good old book, Sex and the Marriage Covenant, A Basis for Morality, John F. Kipley. Again, it is all too likely this was parallel to St. John Paul II's investigation of his theology of the body. I bet you he referred to this very book. Let me read, because I think it puts pornography and all other forms of perversion of the sex act in proper perspective. He says, "It is the common understanding of mankind that the obligations of marital fidelity do not begin until the couple have formally married each other. By the same token, the right or privilege of expressing love in the sexual union does not begin until this couple has entered into the marriage covenant. If that seems arbitrary, consider this analogy which I read someplace but have forgotten the source. A married couple was discussing these matters with a priest who seemed to be a bit confused. So the husband asked him, 'Father, could a man celebrate Mass before he was ordained a priest? Like maybe just the night before?' 'Of course not.' 'Well, Father, it's the same with marriage. You couldn't celebrate Mass until you received your sacrament. We couldn't celebrate marriage without our sacrament.' I think there's a lot in that simple comparison. For a man to attempt to celebrate Mass before he has received the sacrament of holy orders would be high fraud, probably sacrilege. It would be intrinsically dishonest and therefore certainly sinful. For a man and woman to attempt to celebrate their love in sexual union before they marry, and in the case of Christians, thus receive the sacrament of matrimony, is also intrinsically dishonest and therefore sinful. The fact that both the future priest and the future married couple may have a strong desire to perform those acts proper for a priest and a married couple respectively says nothing at all about the morality of their doing them. In both cases, a change in their very being must take place before they may validly perform such acts. Holy orders, sacrament of holy matrimony. That there is an actual, what we call philosophically, an ontological change in the very being of these people considered. And that doesn't take place outside of marriage. So that's just another, I thought, unique and very good example as to why the church teaches what she does teach, which is, as John Kipley says, one of the most common errors of the modern discourse about sexual matters is the treatment of the norm as an ideal. The context is inevitably that the ideal may be relevant for people far advanced in sanctity, but not for the common man and woman. The notion that the doctrine of marital non-contraception, reaffirmed by Humanae Vitae, is a binding norm that applies to all, is either denied or disregarded. Unfortunately, once this norm of marital chastity is treated as an idealistic dream, so are all the other norms of chastity both within marriage and outside of it. A Catholic covenant theology of sex says that at minimum, the act of sexual intercourse must meet 3 conditions. 1, the man and woman, and at the time of the writing of this book, there was no confusion over what that meant. The 2 must be validly married to each other. 2, the act must not be one of marital rape. 3, the act must not be positively and intentionally closed to the transmission of life, i.e., it must be an act of non-contraceptive, non-sterilized intercourse. This ideal goes beyond that and reminds each married couple that the act of marital intercourse is really meant to be a renewal of the faith and caring love they pledged to each other at marriage. The more conscious and explicit this renewal, the better. The ideal sets the stage for an examination of conscience that can help each person grow in marital love. Quote, if I'm anticipating, quote, making love this evening, what is there about my day-to-day, hour-by-hour social intercourse with my spouse that reflects the caring love I pledge at marriage? Have I tried to be helpful, to lighten the burdens of my spouse? Have I done anything to make my spouse feel loved and esteemed? In short, this theology of sex recognizes that it is the little things of daily and hourly social intercourse between husband and wife, taking out the garbage, cleaning up a mess, the kind word, the smile, that are the elements of, quote, making love, unquote, in marriage. It recognizes that the act of marital sex makes love pretty much in direct proportion to the effort put into the non-genital aspects of the marriage. So you can clearly see that any kind of pornographic fantasizing is absolute objectifying of the individual, the woman most of the time, just an object of lust. No caring, no love. It's evil. And in that video that I referred to by Father Relia, he refers very carefully to the importance of confessing in the confessional amendment. I've mentioned this many times. Too many of our priests don't even go there. Asking the penitent, okay, well, what are you going to do now to try to avoid this sin the next time? There needs to be a challenge to the penitent that they're going to make an effort to remove what Father Relia calls, in old-fashioned colloquial circles, it was called an occasion for sin. You need to remove that occasion for sin. Turn off your computer right when it's time to go to bed. Don't hang out there for 20 minutes. Do something at a practical level to remove this, gentlemen, remove this from your very presence. Don't go there. Go to another room, get something to eat, even if it's just before bedtime, all right? This is the kind of practical strategy that defeats the evil one who wants to keep you absolutely in deep bondage, where you have to go, if you go to confession at all, you'll end up going over and over and over again the same sin. Father Relia talks about some of these guys that more or less use the confession as an escape hatch, when in fact they know they're not going to stop. That's not a valid confession, right? They're still in bondage, but they're the ones putting themselves in the bondage. And it's right where the devil wants them. They're not going to amendment. And I've made the comment many times, how is it that so many of our nominal Catholics go to church on Sunday, receive the sacraments, and yet they're living lives of sin, okay? There's a deadness to sin. The sense of sin has virtually been eliminated over habitual sinful acts. And they have a good intention. They want to do something better with their lives, so they go to church on Sunday. But they're not changing and removing the occasion for their particular sin. Amendment. A valid confession is that which confesses the sin in specificity. There was awareness of it and contrition for it and a desire to change. And it's this latter part of the confession that results in real absolution. And he advocates to priests, don't give the absolution unless you hear that amendment all ready for the next time. Very, very astute observation from a most holy priest. Let us go on. An especially beautiful attribute of the covenant theology of sex is that it provides a challenge to each married couple at every stage of their life together, young or old, fertile or infertile. The non-contraceptive aspects of the norm will pass into practical irrelevance after menopause, but the challenge of keeping their sexual intercourse a symbolic renewal of the love they pledged at marriage will pass away only when they do. The belief that sexual intercourse is intended by God to be at least implicitly a renewal of the marriage covenant is rooted in Scripture and is based also on the personal commitment of the couple. It is a simple concept that is ecumenical and provides a key for explaining the evil of non-marital sex. So, to put it bluntly, sex is for marriage. male and female. How about real men standing up for that in the locker room? And the only reason we fell into the insanity of some of our rationalizations today regarding all kinds of sexual perversions, Mr. Kipley refers to a book, and I've referred to it in a previous session or two. He refers to the Catholic Theological Society of America, which put out a book back in 1977 called Human Sexuality, which affirmed the following subjective criteria, quote, "Wholesome human sexuality is that which fosters a creative growth toward integration." Does anybody really know what that means? It discussed both ordinary adultery and spouse swapping and could not say a firm and universal no to either. It frowned on such activity but remained open to the possibility that social sciences might show that somehow people derive some pragmatic benefit from it. I remind you, these are Catholic theologians of the 1970s. And in fact, this very book was part of my undergraduate theology curricula. Mr. Kipley says, "This is utter nonsense, but that is what has been passing for mainline moral theology in the Catholic Church in the United States and probably the rest of the West since Humanae Vitae, 1968. Catholic teaching against adultery of every form remains the negative moral absolute of sacred scripture and sacred tradition. Thou shalt not commit adultery under any circumstances. However, the dissenting theologians have proved willing to compromise universal Christian teaching against adultery, fornication, homosexual behavior, incest, and even bestiality in order to find a way to compromise with the culture." Ladies and gentlemen, the Church's teaching, do not change. Sex, in all of its passion and creativity, is for marriage. One man, one woman, open to life for the rest of their lives. And any other compromise with the culture's mores put on display at the halftime at the Super Bowl, or Andrew Laubacher's wandering on the internet. And why do we need such a complex rating systems for all our movies over the last 40 years? Couldn't they all just be rated G? Let's get it right. Let's get it Catholic. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM, and we'll hear from a priest say exactly the same on the other side, Man to Man, our book review. Well, the book again is called Man to Man. A real priest speaks to real men about marriage, sexuality, and family life. Author, Father James Farfaglia. And just a quick accolade on the back of the book from Donna Marie Cooper O'Boyle, who's been on EWTN many times, the domestic church being her niche theology. She says, "Man to Man couldn't have come at a better time for today's men who are confronted with a myriad of mixed messages regarding their manhood or lack thereof. With eyes wide open to the dangers lurking in today's culture, Father James Farfaglia takes a brutally honest approach to discussions of love, marriage, sexuality, and family life, sure to capture a man's attention. The author urgently invites all men, husbands, fathers, to accept the loving, heroic role that God has created for them. Man to Man should be on every bookshelf, better yet, in every man's hands." So let us start with Father's basic question. What is lust? Catechism of the Catholic Church defines lust with these words: "Lust is the disordered desire for or inordinate enjoyment of sexual pleasure. Sexual pleasure is morally disordered when sought for itself, isolated from its procreative and unitive purposes," i.e., the 6,000-year-old institution of marriage. Lust is a very powerful sin, and it destroys human freedom. Lust is a real problem for most men. Lust is more powerful than an addiction to drugs or to alcohol. One of the principal components of a valid Catholic marriage is the ability of a man and woman to give their free consent to live together as husband and wife until the moment of death. If a man enters marriage controlled by lust, a true marriage may be impossible because lust may be preventing him from entering into a marriage covenant with total freedom. Marriage is not a license to have sex. This is why I only marry couples that I know. This is why marriage preparation is so essential. This is why I will not marry any couple that is living together or trapped in habitual fornication. If the couple is willing to stop the craziness and begin to live a truly Catholic life, then I am more than willing to work with them through serious formation and spiritual direction. Chastity is the best preparation for a lasting marriage. Christian chastity is totally impossible without sanctifying grace. Aside from a serious life of prayer and sacramental life, The first step to living a life of Christian chastity is a radical decision to stop sinning. This is called conversion. All Catholic men are called to live the Christian virtue of chastity, but chastity is cultivated and lived out according to a person's state in life. Chastity for the single man and the married man will be different, but both are called to live the Christian virtue of chastity. The young man who is dating a young woman and eventually becomes engaged to her in order to marry her is called to live a chaste life. He practices chastity and continence. Continence means the absence of sexual intercourse. Sexual intercourse only takes place within the confines of the sacrament of holy matrimony. The ordained priest is called to live a chaste life through a life of celibacy. In all states of life, single laymen who remain single, single men who eventually marry, married men, divorced men, widowers, and men consecrated to God are all called to live the Christian virtue of chastity. And may I vouch, this is exactly what I must do as a single man all my life. Unless God calls me to marriage, and it hasn't happened after 60-something years, I live under the same obligation to be chaste and celibate as the consecrated religious or priest. Father says, just as the modern view of love is completely messed up, so is the modern view of chastity. We can only understand Christian chastity by understanding Christian love. Most Americans assume that chastity simply means abstinence from sexual relations. As a married man, you too are called to be chaste. How is that possible? The best description of chastity can be found in the Catechism of the Catholic Church. Quote, chastity means the successful integration of sexuality within the person and thus the inner unity of man in his bodily and spiritual being. Sexuality, in which man's belonging to the bodily and biological world is expressed, becomes personal and truly human when it is integrated into the relationship of one person to another, in the complete and lifelong mutual gift of a man and a woman. Paragraph 2337. What does all this mean? The word that we need to understand is integration. Adam and Eve, the first man and the first woman, lived in a different situation than we do. Before the fall, they had a unique relationship with God, with nature, with themselves, and with each other. In other words, no alienation. Within this original state, their entire being was integrated. In the case of Adam, for example, every faculty of his soul was in harmony with each other. With the fall, concupiscence began. Adam's intellect was now darkened and his will was weakened. He no longer had dominion over his emotions and passions. Some mysterious way, this fallen condition is passed on to every human being. Although we are transformed through the sacrament of baptism, we still have to deal with the effects of original sin. So before I go on any further, let me give you a challenge that I have mentioned so many times in my preaching and my classes. If you are not going to live a very serious life of prayer and sacramental life, take this book and throw it in the garbage right now. Forget it. Don't waste your time. Integrity means that there exists a psychological wholeness in your reason, will, emotions, and passions. This integrity can only take place ultimately through the transforming power of grace. Concupiscence will always be part of our lives, again, which is that inordinate desire for the flesh. But sexual energy can be redeemed and transformed by grace in such a way that sexual energy can be channeled and directed to love correctly, to love in an altruistic way. Christian chastity, therefore, is loving correctly and loving more intensely. The Catechism goes on to say the following: chastity includes an apprenticeship in self-mastery, which is a training in human freedom. The alternative is clear. Either man governs his passions and finds peace, or he lets himself be dominated by them and becomes unhappy. Catechism of the Catholic Church, paragraph 2339. The Catechism also says self-mastery is a long and exacting work. One can never consider it acquired once and for all. It presupposes renewed effort at all stages of life. The effort required can be more intense in certain periods, such as when the personality is being formed during childhood and adolescence. Never grow tired of the battle. The battle to be chaste, the battle to be faithful, the battle to be a saint and a hero is a lifelong battle. Love will transform and conquer lust. Okay, so now why don't you grab a cup of coffee and I'll tell you all about my lifelong battle with lust. Because unlike all too many, I'm sorry to say, men in the field of religious education, whether they be clerics or lay, well, they didn't have a lot of experience in the dating realm. Too many books. And that was not the case with Timothy. Timothy had many opportunities. Timothy dated many a babe, we would say, especially in that locker room. So what happened, Tim? How come you're still single? And it was indeed because I was too much governed by that inordinate desire for the physical in the flesh, the physical beauty in this case. So many of my women were so very attractive at a physical level, with almost no correspondence to the spiritual. And like too many of us men, we get infatuated by such, and we're not thinking straight. We're not exercising integrity, knowing that we are a composite of body, mind, and spirit. I should have been looking for that nice complementary match with all three components, and not putting way too many eggs in that physical basket, let's just say. There is an old book by Venerable Archbishop Fulton J. Sheen, and it is called It Takes Three. God wants to be part of every part of your relationship. And unless you haven't noticed, sometimes in some of the most beautiful couples, they actually resemble each other in every way. That's a match in heaven. And all you men and young men and teenage men to be, if you want to be men, real men, be men of God and put God first, and all other things will have a way of working out. This is WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. We'll see you next week. God bless. Let your light shine. That is what it's all about here at WQPH Radio 89.3 FM. But we need to hear your story. You want your voice to be his voice. That is making the faith known to others. Please, my number is 877-625-3727. Tim Kilcoyne, TalkCatholic.com. St. Mother Teresa told us, your ministry is your work right where you are. Grab on to this microphone. God bless.